This camera's unbelievable. Only 2 of them in Texas.
Really?
Yeah, it's high definition, brand new.
Huh.
Sony. Colors just jump out at you.
Okay, I'm ready anytime.
Why don't you introduce yourself and then...
My name is Richard S. Period, quote, Cactus, end quote, Pryor, P-R-Y-O-R. But I'm mostly referred to as Cactus. My first involvement with the Johnson family was right after I'd got out of the service, World War II, and I was looking for a job. And I didn't have the slightest idea of what I was going to do. I knew I was going to be going to the University of Texas, but I needed money with which to sustain myself. And I was listening to the radio, KTBC radio, and I noticed that all of the announcers were women. And that was because the men had gone off to war. And simply because I had a male voice and had no experience at all as a broadcaster. I'd done a lot of MC work in high school and freshman year at the University of Texas. Mainly because I had a male voice, I was hired. Mrs. Johnson owned the station at that time. Had only bought it a year before, and it was a very simple radio station as far as employees was concerned, because she had inherited a very small staff. And we also shared frequencies every afternoon, I think from 1 to 3 o'clock, with a station in College Station, Texas. The Longhorns sharing station frequency with the Aggies. Later on, after she took hold and really got to working, they got full-time frequency without having to divide it up with College Station. The very first night I met Mrs. Johnson was at a party at their apartment house here in Austin, and several of the people who worked for the radio station also lived in that apartment house. Got a good rate. And she was underneath the house with her daughters, Lucy and Linda, when I came in. It was an outdoor party. And she was collecting soda water bottles for the girls to go and sell. And that was my first involvement with her economics. And I never will forget, she also sprayed us with a flit gun, because the mosquitoes were bothering us outside, and she literally came and sprayed us, and it got the mosquitoes. It almost choked half of us to death. And that was my first time to see him too. And he was suffering from indigestion, and he was eating gobs and gobs and gobs of soda, baking soda. And the most I heard from him was belches that night. So my first impressions were rather strange. Later I learned that Lady Bird was the finest boss a person could have. She took that radio station in Austin, Texas, over Nixon Clay College, moved it to the Brown Building, hired a good staff of people, but more significantly, put together a real news staff. Most radio stations had no news staffs at that time. They would rip and read, take the newspaper and take the stories out of it and read them. That was your news department. But she hired Paul Bolton, who had been head of INS here in Austin, as a news editor, and he brought in some very knowledgeable and very seasoned news people. Stuart Long was one of them. His wife was the first Austin female mayor. And Ronnie Duggar, who went on to start the Texas Observer magazine, and people of that stature, Ray Waddell, who became Austin's #1 columnist. And so for the first time in Austin radio, there was instantaneous, really good news. And Mrs. Johnson was hands-off as far as running the station was concerned. She hired good people and she let them run the place. But she was the best merchandising person you could have, because she went to all of her sponsors and bought something from them, no matter what the product. She was loyal to her sponsors, and got CBS affiliation, and it became a really fine radio station that will be celebrating its about, well, it started in 1945. I worked for him for a few months, and then I went to Alice, Texas, as program director of a radio station there. Incidentally, was run out of town by the sheriff because my news editor and I had exposed him on the air for some shenanigans he was involved in, including prostitution. And the sheriff came out on the golf course. Mike Holberg was my news editor, and he was just back from the Marine Corps, wore out in the Pacific, looking for a little peace and quiet, and he never had his life so endangered as when we got crosswise with that sheriff, because he gave us to sundown to get out of town for putting that story out on him. And we went to the station manager, name was Ed Lloyd, and told him the story laughingly. And he said, "Boys, you ever hear of the Parr family?" I said, "Yeah, I heard that they have a little to do down here." He said, "Well, that sheriff was put in office by the Parr family, and take my advice and don't wait for the sun to set." And so we scooted, and 3 months later my successor did the same expose, and the sheriff walked up to him on the main street of Alice, Texas, and shot him dead. And the sheriff later committed suicide, hung himself in the jail in Belton, Texas. So I fooled around with the other station for a while, and then 1948 the Johnsons called and said that they were getting ready to apply for television, and they needed a program director for radio, and they wanted somebody that could also be program director of television. So I went up and had a talk with him. J.C. Kellum was station manager then. And never will forget, Johnson was sitting at Mr. Kellum's desk and had his feet propped up on the desk, and we were talking about radio and television. He says, "Now, we want you to be our program director, but you can also work for the family if you want to." I said, "Well, what does that mean?" He said, "Well, if you work for the family, not only work on the radio station and television station, and we're going to get a bunch of radio stations, but you'd also help me with some of my political work. You might have to write me some gags for some of my speeches, or might have to go and precede me and get everything ready. And you'd wear a little better suit and eat a little better brand of steak and drive a little better car." And I said, "Well, Congressman, I appreciate that, but I'm not a political person, so I think I'll just work for the stations." And he says, "Fine. I've often wondered what the future would have been had I chose otherwise." But I was allowed and had the privilege of being involved in the Johnson career, not only through the radio station, but I became their MC at the functions up at the LBJ Ranch. And that was really one of the most exciting opportunities of my life, because I got to chop in tall cotton, as they say in Texas, and had some wonderful, wonderful experience. I'll never forget the first big one I went to. Ayub Khan, Pakistan's president, had come to the ranch. Johnson was vice president then, I think. And they asked me, Liz Carpenter asked me to get some entertainment that would be appropriate for a barbecue to be held at the LBJ Ranch honoring Ayub Khan. Well, barbecues in a Texas ranch call for that Texas-type entertainment. So I called Eddie Arnold, a very popular singer of Western songs and country songs, and asked if he would come down and entertain them. And he was so excited about it, he came about 2 days earlier just to get the feel of it and wrote some songs especially for the occasion. So the program call for the barbecue down by the banks of the Pedernales River, program call for the barbecue to begin. I would to welcome everyone. And then I would introduce Eddie Arnold. He would sing his songs. And then I would introduce Vice President Johnson, and he would bring up Ayub Khan. Well, halfway through the barbecue, Mr. Johnson came to me and said, "Introduce me." I said, "It's not time to introduce you." He says, "Introduce me." I said, "I'd be happy to." So I got up and introduced him. He made his remarks, called Ayub Khan to the stage, presented him with a big Stetson hat. Khan responded. They left the stage, got in a golf cart, and took off. About 400 people in the press following them as I introduced Eddie Arnold, who sang to the backs of the departing heads. I saw Eddie Arnold in Las Vegas about 3 years later, and he said, "I'm still voting Republican." Another occasion, I got a call about 2 o'clock one morning. Didn't have the slightest idea who it was, and I was not very polite when I asked who in the heck this was. He said, "This is Lyndon Johnson, and I'm in Lubbock, Texas, and tonight I'm going to give a party up at the ranch for a fellow named Cantinflas. He's a Mexican entertainer." I said, "Yes, I know about Cantinflas. He's sort of the Will Rogers of Mexico." He said, "Well, I want you to get some people that he'd be comfortable with." And the cocktail party started at 7 o'clock, and we'll see you there. Click. So I spent part of the day gathering up people that I thought Cantinflas would be comfortable with. I got the professor of Spanish at the University of Texas, the head of the drama department, and people from the Mexican consul in Austin. And there was a cocktail party, and it was very nice, and Cantinflas was very polite, but you could see that he was just bored to death. And Johnson could see it too. So he disappeared for a while and came back with all of his ranch hands of Hispanic descent. And it's still in their work clothes with their wives and the kids. And Cantinflas's eyes just lighted up as bright as stars. Of course, he was a champion of the little man in Mexico. And it became a wonderful party, and everybody kind of melded together. And it was just an example. It was more than just an example of Johnson's political wisdom, but it was also, I think, a reference to his concern, especially for the Hispanic people, because when he was teaching school down in South Texas, right after he got out of Southwest Texas, he learned about the plight and developed a great sensitive for that people of that ilk. And next day, I think he took Cantinflas to San Antonio. And Cantinflas had really not known why he had been asked. Actually, the main purpose was to help Henry Gonzalez, Representative Henry Gonzalez from San Antonio, in his campaign for re-election. And he spent the next day on a wagon going around San Antonio, responding to introductions and nodding his head when they said he was a great supporter of Gonzalez. Another time, they were having a party at the ranch for all of the ambassadors to the United Nations. And again, they wanted Western entertainment. And Liz Carpenter called and said, "The president wants you to fly to Albany, Texas, and they've got a play that they do every year up there about the settling of the Fort Griffin area back in the 80s. And he wants to see if it would be of a quality that they could use to entertain the people from the United Nations." So I flew out there and landed on the school front yard And half the town of Albany, Texas, which was out in West Texas, northwest Texas, was there and in costume. There were Indians, there were cowboys, they had their own calliope, which they'd made themselves. They had wagon trains, buckboards, and it was just, it looked like Barnum and Bailey. And they did a sample for me of this play that depicted the settling of that area back in the 1800s. And I addressed them afterwards, and I said, I really enjoyed it. Matter of fact, I'm tickled to death that I enjoyed it, because I wouldn't have the guts to say no to you. They were armed also with pistols and rifles. So they came to the ranch, took over the town of Fredericksburg, and all of them in costumes. And Fredericksburg had learned that you never knew what was going to come up, but if it regarded LBJ, well, it would be exciting. And they had a wonderful, wonderful program, a musical about herding cattle. And one of the songs was Herding Cattle. And the script call for the LBJ herd of cattle to be held in abeyance on the east side of the Pedernales River. Then the cowboys were coming on the horses, and they were singing a song about herding cattle. And on a certain cue, while the cattle would be brought into the picture. Well, LBJ didn't know the script, but he saw his cattle down there about a block away, and he called Liz Carpenter and said, "Liz, get those cattle of mine down here so the people can see them." And she came to me and she says, "Cactus, the president wants his cattle down here." I said, "Tell him that it's not time for his cattle." She said, "You tell him." So I went to Bess Ables, who was social secretary at the White House, and I said, "Bess, we need for you to go tell the president that it's not time for his cattle." She said, "I'm social director of the White House, and cattle are not included." She said, "Go over here and see Dale Malachek, the ranch foreman." So I went to Dale, and I said, "Dale, we want you to move your cattle." He said, "I'm not moving cattle. These are not my cowboys. I got my own herd drivers, and they're not here." So I went back and told Liz, and she finally went and told Johnson. And about that time, the cattle were there anyway. They'd gotten the cue, and it was a wonderful dramatization of West as it was. And so many people were very positively affected by these barbecues, because they spoke of Texas, they spoke of cattle, and they spoke of Johnson's heritage. Let me see. Another occasion they had at the ranch was shortly after the assassination. Well, let me tell that story first. Got a call from Liz Carpenter, and she said, "The president wants to give a barbecue at the ranch. Vice president, I'm sorry, wants to give a party at the ranch day after tomorrow, and wants you to get some proper entertainment, and it'll be on the banks of the Pedernales, etc., etc." So I contacted the man who taught the Texas Rangers how to shoot, Billy McElroy. He was just an incredible rifle and pistol shot. And since it was going to be about horses and the West, thought it might be a good idea to have a little demonstration of cowboy shooting. Well, we were down by the banks of the Pedernales with the Secret Service men. This was a couple of days before the barbecue. Secret Service wanted to be certain that safety was prominent, that there was no chance of a ricochet shot or something. All of a sudden, we hear the honking of a car, and we look up, and there's a pickup roaring our way. And the driver was honking the horn and had his head out the window shouting something. When he got a little closer, I recognized it was the ranch foreman, Dale Malachek, and was yelling, "The president has been shot. The president's been shot in Dallas." Well, we all went to into the kitchen of the ranch house, where there's a small color television set sitting on top of the refrigerator, and watched the story as Walter Cronkite reported of the assassination of Kennedy. And about that time, I guess we learned before the nation did, one of the Secret Service men came from the shack from behind the ranch house and said, "You're now standing in the house of the President of the United States. President Kennedy just died." Well, we all stood there, dumbfounded, of course, shocked. Finally, Mary Davis, who was the cook for the Johnsons, took a hot pad and holder and opened the door of the oven and pulled out 2 pecan pies. And she said, "These were to have been for President Kennedy. What do I do with them now?" Bess Abel said, "Well, wrap them in aluminum foil and I'll take them back to Washington with me." It was the first decision made regarding the White House in that particular house. So a few weeks later, he gave he served as host for a dinner for Chancellor Erhard of Germany and his entire cabinet, and Johnson had his cabinet there too. It was a stag affair. And once again, a call from Liz Carpenter, and she says, "We need some appropriate background music for the occasion." So I said, "Well, I know just the person to have." Her name is Linda Loftus, and she's a former Miss Texas who won the talent competition in the Miss America contest. Beautiful, beautiful young lady, blue eyes, blonde hair, and she dressed as a German peasant girl, and presented a program of songs. During the dinner, we had a quartet from the Austin Symphony Orchestra playing background music. Halfway through the meal, Johnson comes out and said, "Don't these guys know anything peppy? Can't they play Deep in the Heart of Texas or Don't Fence Me In?" I said, "Not unless Mozart composed it, Mr. President." Well, after the meal, all of the distinguished guests came out for cigars and liqueurs in the big living room, a fire going in the big fireplace there. And I presented Linda Loftus, and she presented a program of German lieder songs. And she sang one aria, which was One Fine Day from Madame Butterfly. And she completely enchanted the audience. After her performance, Chancellor Erhard went to a vase and picked out a yellow rose and presented it to her, kissed her hands, and said, "That is the most wonderful performance of German lieder that I have ever heard. And how did you know my very favorite aria?" And it was just a matter of luck. The German Secretary of State then stood and said, "When I was a young man in Berlin, I went to a performance of a child prodigy pianist. It was the most remarkable performance I've ever heard in my life. And I often wondered what happened to that young man. Tonight I have discovered it is her accompanist, Maestro Ezra Rocklin of the Austin Symphony Orchestra." Just one of those wonderful serendipities. It was during the Christmas season, and as I said, it was a stag affair. And out on the porch, staring through the window inside her own house, was Lady Bird Johnson, like a little child, cheating for a look at the Christmas presents before Santa Claus had left. Then, during that same stay, there was going to be a barbecue for Erhard, and Liz and I talked about what we should have for entertainment. We said, well, this is a great opportunity to demonstrate to the world that Texas is not just hillbilly songs. And so we suggested Van Cliburn to perform at the barbecue. And it was to be, again, outside. Made arrangements to have the piano brought in. I had called his mother and made some of the arrangements. And I was doing my television show a couple of days before the event. And as I was delivering a commercial, they hold up a sign that I can see and the audience can't that says, "Trouble, come to the control room." So I said, well, I can't come now. I have to finish my program. So I finally finished it. Took about 45 minutes, it seemed, to do the next 3 minutes. Went in the control room, and Mrs. Van Cliburn was on the phone. She said, "I have just heard that my son is to play at a hoedown and with bales of hay around him, and we will just not do that. Click." So I called her back and said, "Mrs. Cliburn, what happened is, you remember we discussed that it was going to be outside underneath the big trees, and he was going to perform music appropriate to the great out of doors, the beauty of the world. Well, they're afraid it's going to rain, so we moved it inside the Stonewall Gymnasium. And matter of fact, I had to take the whole wall out in order to put the piano on. And it will not, he can play the same songs, and it'll be a very dignified event, but it just won't be the same setting." And we finally talked her into it, and it turned out to be a great success. He performed not in white tie and tails, though. He did wear just a black suit, and completely enchanted the audience. And the Glee Club from Fredericksburg, the nearby town, came and sang a couple of songs in very fluent German, including "The Eyes of Texas." What? President Johnson had a great sense of humor. I don't know a better storyteller in my life. And he really enjoys it, but not if the joke is on him. But he liked practical jokes. And one of his favorites, there was an amphibian car at the LBJ Ranch. I think it was a Nash. And just from a casual glance, it just looked like a little Nash automobile. And he loved to put people in that car, be driving down by the river, and all of a sudden swerve toward the river and said, "Oh my God, the brakes won't hold." And they'd hit the water and go scooting across the top of the water with some very horrified people. Let me see. Can you hold it a minute?